Welcome back to the SKATEROOM Podcast, where we talk art and skate in the name of social change.
All right. Our guest today is bringing us the California sunshine.
The 85-degree weather? Yes.
Coming in all the way from LA, introducing the scholar of skateboarding. Our guest created the University of Southern California's first class on skateboarding, business, media, and culture. He holds a Ph.D. researching the politics of race and identity within skateboarding, and he's known as a skateboarding diplomat for the U.S. Department of State. What else? I mean, welcome, Dr. Neftalie Williams.
Thank you very much.
So good to see you. So we'll go back to the beginning to begin with to give the viewers a little bit of a background of who you are. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure many of them will know, but for those who don't, where did you grow up? How did you get into skateboarding?
So I always like to do the short version of this because it gives everyone something to Google later on. But I'm originally from Massachusetts, and the skate scene that I grew up is in Boston and outside of Boston and sort of New England as a whole. And so anyone who's actually been or lived there knows that New England as a region is a sort of unified skate community, right? You've got some skaters in Vermont, some skaters that are in Massachusetts, some that are in Rhode Island. The weather's really bad, so you have very few brothers and sisters throughout the region, and that's how you sort of get everything together, right? So for me, when I got started, I guess the best way to say it is nobody knew anything about skateboarding. It just, when we were about 15, 16 years old, first person got their board, then the next person got their board, and we were all going, whoa, what is this new thing that we don't know anything about? And I think that that's actually what was magical, is because nobody knew anything about it. There wasn't really anyone to be a coach or to say, like, this is how you do skateboarding.
Not like now.
You would. Okay, that is true. We could talk about that. So I have feelings. I have feelings in good ways and bad ways on that.
Yeah.
But it's right. Now there are more sort of people ahead and projecting their image of skating on. But at that point, it was very organic, very free for all.
And what kind of year was this?
Those are the things I don't talk about. But
disclose what you will.
Yes, no, I'm just but what I yes. Okay. But no, I'm just joking. No, this is 90s skating. This is 90s skating. But I think what was really important then that I didn't realize is that, so I lived in this apartment building, 18 stories, and there was nothing that bonded the kids that lived in the building. Okay, so just to paint it is like, this building is great, 18-story building. You've got people from every background. We've got, at that time, we have like Thai kids, just Asian kids are here, African-American kids are here. There's some white kids that are living in the building, Latinx kids. Like, none of us were together. And the reason for that is because none of the parents were together. Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to nerd out a little bit to really kind of get to the basis of where my philosophy comes from. But there was no reason for us to be friends because our parents were telling us, like, hey, what are you doing hanging out with that group? Or what are you hanging out with this group? Like, we don't do that. We don't cross those like racial and ethnic lines, right? And so once we started skating, because nobody knew what to do and we were all excited about skateboarding as a whole, everyone was like, oh, I'm figuring out how to ollie. Oh, you're figuring out how to ollie? I'm going to figure out how to ollie. Oh, we're going to learn how to kickflip. So all of us were in this organic phase of learning. And of course, now we know that's like experiential learning and there's big phrases for that, but we're just kids, right? Yeah. So what I saw then was that was what was bringing us all together. And of course, like, I'm still a baby then, but I am noting that under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be talking to the same people. And most importantly, that our parents were not that psyched about us all hanging out. Now, in retrospect, of course, their parents, and I'm not mad at anybody's mom or dad. It was just a different time, right? So for us, we had this sort of shared love of skateboarding culture. And then I also have to say, one of the things that's been really important to me is, or that I lucked out was, just like this book here is The Skate Girls of Kabul, right, for Skatistan, is I grew up skating with a good friend of mine, Ellen. So there was a woman who was in our crew.
Yeah.
And that's something that I didn't realize that everybody didn't have. Mm-hmm. So I always thought of like everyone is skating together. That's it. Like it's a multiracial, multi-gendered crew at that time. And so I don't know, that just those are my formative years. Mm-hmm. And of course, as time goes on, that's when I sort of realized like what's special in skateboarding is that we were crossing these bridges not only between ourselves, but historical bridges that our parents didn't even want to really participate. Now, there's more that I learned, of course, in my skate research, but I would say I always want to be fair to those parents at the time. They were coming from a different time period, right? And so some of that, like keeping everyone separated, was also a thing of safety. It was both discrimination, but it was also safety, going like, hey, you don't know those folks. I don't know what to, I don't know how they live.
Mm-hmm. But it's a similar thing we see in projects which we sponsor as well, is that it's skateboarding that brings, particularly in, for example, the Seven Hills project or the Free Movement Skateboarding project that you have, and same with SKATEROOM. In fact, it's a really core aspect of all of the projects, but you see people from completely different backgrounds who, due to the nature of the cities that they live in, are being segregated or separated in a very clear way. And then you have the parents who are collecting around the sessions, who begin, integrating with one another and speaking, and you break down those barriers. Yeah.
So I saw that early on, and it kind of just always stayed with me. And like, super short version is just to go, I was very young and I decided I wanted to do a skateboarding camp for kids, because I was like, oh, skateboarding has been something cool for me and has done this. So I did that. And so part of the people who were in that early class, I'll just say that's like Ryan Gallant, amazing pro skater. Also during that time, it's Charlie Wilkins, who's in Boston, is Jamal Williams. PJ was there, or wasn't there at camp, but he was around at those days, Jeremy Rogers. So that's sort of my like skate time period. Jamal and moving onward. So like, I feel really good. This is
still when you were young that you were?
I mean, I was a little older, but I wasn't 15. I was a little older. I did my camp when I was like still, probably my 20s or something.
So when did you realize that like most people didn't have that that environment where they had this more kind of diverse group of?
I mean, I knew it from Jamal will tell you, and Jamal Williams will tell you this and actually anyone who's from New England will let you know that I love it. But segregation and the discrimination is sort of like, I want to say it like in a good terms, but it's very much historical, right? So what part of town to be in, what part of town not to be in. However, that isn't to say that like New England, and particularly Massachusetts, is not very progressive. We know that, right? I mean, Massachusetts is always on the forefront of being progressive. But I also know in the ways that it can be oppressive, it's very stark. Like, exactly where you are, what neighborhood is, what set of jobs and things you have. And that's kind of what made me move towards the West Coast in the first place, is knowing that there were still the opportunities out West. And then, that was where the skateboarding industry was. So, anyone who's from that era and from that time period will tell you like, hey, that's just how it was. And so that's why all those pro skaters don't live at home anymore. Right, we like go home, like Jamal. We go home, but then we leave, and like there was just more opportunities. But I will say this: what was wonderful is that it meant when you saw somebody who skated, like you knew they were in, because our weather is terrible, the snow is on the ground, it's awful time. So
it's about a lot of stuff to get where they are.
Yeah. So it's and there's a no joke. There's a special love. Like when I see PJ or Jeremy or just anyone from that back east, it. You know what it takes to make it and to like do something with skateboarding. And because you can still go home and people are like, oh, you're teaching? What's, what I mean? It's just oh, what, you've got your Ph.D.? I mean, it's like, it's just a different sort of rough and tumble bit. But there's so many good people who hold it down, like Theory Skate Shop that's back home, and they really still like, they are also from that time period too, of like, yo, we're in this together collectively. So that's just a quick frame of New England, which is why I don't like to start with that question, because it gets so much stuff. But that's just a little bit of the history.
Yeah, cool, nice.
So you went out west, scoped out the industry a little bit. Like, what did you find there? What was so different about, aside from the weather part, what was different between West Coast and East Coast?
Yeah, I was like, oh no, let's get to the course. No, I'm just playing. That's fine. Okay, so it's what I will say is. Being on the West Coast, it is still the same today as it was then, and as it'll always be. Is the West Coast has a lot of progressive ideas, and there's a lot of space for progression. And there's also more room for, as a matter of fact, we were just talking about this the other day. People go to the West Coast and lose the old identity that they had. They did it when the West was one, and they still do it now, right? That's where all the dreams are. You know,
Frontier.
right? It's always that. And even as much as we may pick on it, like I love LA, and you can be like, oh, LA is plastic or LA is fake. No, LA is dope. LA is just 100% dope. Now, there are some parts of it that cannot be great, but that's generally just folks who aren't from the city trying to like take advantage of people. You know, LA lets you have your hopes and dreams in a way that you might not be able to get in other places in the US. That's not to diss anywhere else, because I love all over the place, especially like Florida, Tampa, Texas. Those are my other skate scenes too. But the West Coast has something special that allows you to be, or at least lets you attempt to be the person that you want to be. And you know, that's why I still call it home. And then I go back and forth between the two.
Yeah. So
try to keep that short still too, but that's it.
But then that's industry world, and you know, you're very much an academic in terms of skateboarding. So how do you maneuver from this to that? And like, was this always your intention? Were you already on this path by then, or
was it the progressivism of the West that kind of opened that up?
Something you wanted to fix?
Okay, well, yeah, right. Because I know you have thoughts. No, I will say. Okay, so this will get into more philosophies that we can talk about later in the way that I think about academia skateboarding in the first place. But it sort of comes down to, I guess, the thing that's the most important is like marginalized folks will find power in the things that others don't. And so Ian Borden, who's amazing, which I know you have a question like who else to look up. Ian's work is fantastic. He was on my committee for review for my dissertation, and he had said, like, Neftalie, I hadn't thought about skateboarding as a place for people of color to really like gain power. I hadn't thought about that before. And he said, like, what brought that line of questioning? I said, oh, Ian, I've been black this whole time, right? Like that's the deal, right? Yeah. So it's like that for all marginalized folks. There's always like trying to find the power in everyday objects, right? So that's without going like too nerdy, but like that is the history of people of color or marginalized groups in the U.S. So for most folks, it is just skateboarding and how they interpret skateboarding or how it lives in their life, right? And which is fine. But in my life, it was a very, very empowering tool where I got a chance to see myself reflected in skaters of color when I did see them in the magazines. And those are things that I had to push back on stereotypes of who was or wasn't allowed to skate. Just like my friend Ellen, like, oh, there's no girls that skate, but like Ellen skates. So for me, any woman who wants to skate can skate, right? So, and it's the same when I used to explain to people like, well, oh, there's no black skaters, that's for white kids, and any skater of color from that time period will tell you, of course you hear that. But what you see is solidarity in those that are there before you. And so part of my job became going like, well, I want to make sure that I am adding to this fabric of skate culture. So to get to your question, I became a photographer and writer for skateboarding magazines. I did stuff for Transworld, Strength Skateboarding magazine, like early days, and was really like always sort of had that framework. I looked up to, I had every black skater and skaters of color on my wall when I was a kid. And so when I was allowed in the industry, when I like made my space, that was always on my mind. I became a photographer because I wanted to shoot the things that I wanted to see. And people go like, oh, skateboarding has got all these rough rules, it has all these things, it's all these, old white men are like the place and playground of young white men. And sure, all of that is true. Where I get upset with the scholarship previously is that is true if that's the only group that you look at, right? So if we really want to know what skateboarding is or can be, you have to look to the groups that are marginalized and go like, how are they using skateboarding, right? And so to what I usually put a bow on things is to just really go like, everyone always asks like right now, like, why are there so many women? Why are there so many queer skaters? Like, why is the LGBTQ space blowing up? Like, what's happening? For me, it's like, well, I'm sure what's happening is everyone's going like, oh, nobody owns this thing? Yeah. Like, that's what's new and that's what's revolutionary, is that everyone is picking up on that. I just saw Brianna King just did her ad for Mont Blanc. that just dropped this morning. Yeah. And I was like, oh man, that's just beautiful to see, see this, this young woman of color, like, she's killing it with queer and women-centric skate meetups. She's killing it as a skateboarder and like also changing the game on like who's allowed to be in skateboarding. And so,
well, there's an element, because you bring in that, there's an element of it which is that skateboarding in the 90s or even prior to that, and there's been waves of skateboarding and its commercial appeal. Yeah. And like anything, like the Dick Hebdige subculture thing, of it's like as soon as it becomes commercializable and captured by people outside of it, then the culture produces almost like a viral response or an immune response where it goes, right, we need to change now because it's now we're in Top Man, or now we're, so you're like, you maneuver yourself again, and the people who are often benefiting from that investment don't see that things are developing and often even become exclusionary because they see it changing again. Like, hang on, we're benefiting from this. We don't want it to change. This is working for us. But now you see this new wave happening, and now all the brands go for it. Everyone wants to go for it. And I think it's an amazing thing to see, but it's a constant push and pull between
very much
culture and counterculture, which is it's a beautiful thing, but I don't think we're ever going to solve that back and forward.
And truthfully, I don't even know, like, it's not even right. I didn't even necessarily that we need to solve it. It's just it is what happens. So there's a scholar, Zoe Corin, who I worked on with the USC Tony Hawk Foundation / skate park study when we put that together, and Stephanie Rellis, who's at UNLV, and so we actually have been really going into some of the theories that I don't want to give too much away, but I'll just say that we're theories where we're looking at skateboarding culture as a living, breathing organism, right? And when does an organism recognize itself or not recognize itself? Like, when do we send, right? If we think about it, like, when do we think things are invading the body, or when do we realize, like, oh no, this is just antibodies, we're like working together.
It's helpful. It's
right. Yeah. We're the same thing. So we're working on that right now and thinking through like major ecosystems. Like, you might live, let's just use the Amazon as an example. You might live in this section of the Amazon and someone else lives on the ground, right? You're still in the Amazon. You just see life differently within that space. So I don't want to give too much away on that because that's going to be in what we publish.
And sometimes the Amazon burns itself down so it can regrow.
Yeah, like, exactly. Also, all you're right. Also true. Right. These are natural occurrences, and it's really sort of a question of like, when do other people benefit? And so I will give it, there's always a question of going, like, looking at the previous scholarship, which I pushed back a lot on in my PhD, which was just to go, hey, if we are centering the lives of young white males in the research, then you are going to learn about the lives of young white males. So that doesn't, to me, that doesn't necessarily prove anything. It just shows like, well, this is, you're probably going to get that. There's a level of privilege that they may have that other folks don't have, that they're not aware of. And also, we're in a new time now where, with the murder of George Floyd, as when we first were talking, the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, everybody is more aware right now, right? Everybody knows, like, oh, my taxi driver here was saying Neftalie, like, literally, she said, like, does racism exist the way when we saw that guy, when we saw him murdered, we're like, that can't be for real. Like, you can not like the police or have a fight with the police, but like, that can't be real. And so that was just a cabbie who was like, this is like, all of a sudden this was real life. And she's like, well, how do you navigate that? Which is a much longer, different podcast for sure. Yeah. But
it's again, super interesting though,
right? Like, these are, when you recognize that people are living under this level of oppression, like, all things can become emancipatory. Right, that's the deal. Like, that's the bit of like the act of skateboarding and people who don't get where skateboarding can be. It's like, well, you're not framing this to as opposed to what, right? Like, what is our life like without this? And I have some, I have a lot of different athletes end up in my class as well because they're interested in action sports. Some of them are football or water polo or basketball. And so we had one of our first class, our second class was yesterday. And so we started getting in the dynamic of, when did the fun go away? And so these are young players who are in college who want to go into the NFL, right? They want to make money and do do this. And so we were having a discussion between traditional sport and action sports as a whole. And one of the students says, Neftalie, I think I had the most fun when we were still in high school. In high school, if we were defining action sports, like still chasing the stoke and the feeling, right? That freedom that's involved in. And they were like, oh, yeah, we don't feel it that same way. It's more of a job now. Like we get up for practice, we do this. And so we were defining the differences between traditional sport, like when those become like a career path or a job versus like every day we can get up and skate and like feel it for ourselves. So, that's just, those are just like things that we talk about in class, but also like, what is this that's special in action sports? And then that's for people who are marginalized, that's when you find this emancipatory power. Now, yes, I'm using like bigger terms, whatever, but like, this is the truth. So we have to investigate how people's lives are lived constrained so that we can actually recognize freedom. When we get to like the Hebridge work and we get into like counterculture versus popular culture, all of that, like, you got to be real careful. You got to be real careful because that can come from a lens of what you think is emancipatory, of what you think is pushing back. And that's in a lot of scholarship that originally started like looking at action sports like, oh, everything is counterculture, and that can be for anything, like, oh, it's cool until it becomes this. Well, what's it like when you're like living poor and don't have anything, right? Like, so we have to balance out that critique. And I think sometimes people like toss that critique a little too cavalier, and now that's just me. No, no, but not on you. But like, I just want us to just be aware, like as we talk about, right? Like, it is different. I am still like a cis straight black man in America, right? Like my life and experience is different than yours here. It's different for other folks, right? My life is different than Brianna's, but we have skateboarding as common, right? Like our new skate study had 20 different skaters from every background. We had trans skaters, we had like African-American skaters, we had Latinx skaters, female skaters. And I stopped the study halfway through to just go, I just want to see where we're at for a moment. Can anyone in the Zoom tell me a little bit about someone else's story that they've heard in the Zoom space that we've been working in a way that you think that maybe they wouldn't know that it resonated with you?
Okay, and so building a bridge between...
it, for us, it was COVID, so it's building a bridge between squares and this feeling that you have right now thinking about it, like, how are we going to do this, right? Wow. So I will just tell you that was magical. And it was magical because we had, queer white women who said, I felt like oppressed in these ways and constrained in these ways, but I do not know what it's like to be chased by the police for being a skateboarder and being black and dealing with the police in this way. Like, I never thought of that. I think about like my own ways in which I'm constrained, and I kind of lump everyone in this spot. But the same thing for, those black skaters who are like saying, this is the life that I lead, and like, oh, I don't know the life of any of the trans skaters who are here. Or for all the skaters, for the person that I would say that was just cruising, that they maybe thought was like not the most core. That person was the one who defined skateboarding and what freedom in skateboarding meant better, subjectively, but really spoke to that in a way that you just watched everybody's face tear up to go, this is a person who's like just skating back and forth every day, and the freedom, the constraint of like what their body looks like, who's in charge of them, and when they get on that board, what it meant to them. It was like, you don't know other people's lives, so you got to be good about it. And like, they may be experiencing skateboarding, as we found out, in a very, very deep way that, that you thought you were the deepest. So I always want to kind of like be aware of that. That applies
your
to
skateboarding
Olympics.
is not the skateboarding, and and your experience is not the experience. But there are similarities and there are important distinctions.
We have ways to come together. It's like the fact that we do all of these four wheels and a board that we get that push, and that push goes to everything we do. That's how we push forward on all of our stuff.
Maybe to
answer some of the questions that are on the paper. No. See, I told you we can't start from that
we've jumped around
question.
A lot, and I want to make sure that people understand what it is you're doing.
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
Yes, like, sure.
So, can you give us a basic rundown of what you do, the positions you hold, the course you teach, like maybe go into a little bit
just
of like
a little bit,
how, you know, you came from, as you say, this very particular understanding of skateboarding as a and your background in skateboarding to going to the
public diplomacy and all
West Coast, and then you've made it into academia.
Yeah.
But like, how, first of all,
I told you it was a long story.
Yeah,
That's
no,
it's
but
like
it's a great
too
story.
long. It's
but
too
it jumps
long.
across your whole history.
Yeah.
And what's super interesting is I wonder, like, how do you, first of all, convince a world which is unconvinced by your thesis initially that what you're talking about is even worth funding or even putting into that? And second of all, where do you now find yourself in terms of what courses do you teach, what positions do you hold? So like maybe just run down so
a brief
people
synopsis.
understand.
Okay, so I'm a lecturer at the University of Southern California. My Ph.D. is in sociology, and particularly I look at race and ethnicity and skateboarding culture. And then my Ph.D. was, of course, basically the history of skaters of color from the 1960s to the present day.
Perfect.
So when we stop and think about that for a minute, that means we literally watched waves of a U.S. human experience and how skateboarding was integrated in that across the decades. So that's what my PhD was on, and that's a book that will be coming out with UC Berkeley Press very soon. So that's the sort of bit you can go and read that, right?
Amazing.
And then what I will say is what I learned being at USC. I was lucky enough to do undergrad and my master's there. My undergrad was in communication, and then my master's degree is in public diplomacy. So that's really where the spark came during undergrad, and I owe it to Professor Nick Cull. He knows this, so it's fine to say it. You know, he's an amazing scholar and historian from the UK. He came in the class, and he was really talking to our undergrad class about cultural diplomacy and the way sports play a role and the way the arts play a role, and how do things like what you do here, how do those become something that builds bridges between disparate people. And so and public diplomacy is done in formal ways to encourage that informal relationship building. So I remember that like clear as day. He came to visit my Professor Bob Shear's class, and that's when I realized, I was like, that's what we're doing in skateboarding. That's what we've been doing this whole time. This is what I learned when I was young. And why is this not something that's really being discussed? Why is skateboarding still being seen in this way, when actually the way that I know Brazil is through these skaters? The way that I know the skaters in the UK, like, this is the way I know the world. And if public diplomacy is building these bridges between communities, and sport diplomacy, of course, is a real thing, but, what about something that's in the intersection between cultural diplomacy, educational diplomacy, and cultural diplomacy, and sport, all these things all at one time? I was like, skateboarding has been doing all of these. This seems like where I need to go. And so I got my master's in public diplomacy. And in that time, I started working and was the chair of a group called Cuba Skate. So we were doing work back and forth in Cuba, bringing boards back and forth. Shout out to Miles Jackson, the founder. And so it sort of all clicked for me, and during my master's, that's when it was just all coming to terms. I'm like, I know what I'm doing. I know what's missing. This is not being talked about in academia, and they're actually looking for these answers. The world is looking for what we're doing in skateboarding, and I need to slow it down, stop it, and create this translation, and make this be a space for all of the skaters. First of all, so they don't have to do it. Right, so that they can just keep on skating. So there's always this bit where skaters are like, "Dude, why are you being a big nerd?" Right, right.
But so you don't have to.
And that's it for me. It really is to go like, so it can be easier for us in the next generation of skaters, so that you can just skate, and so that people get who we are. And of course, there's an argument that might go like, "I don't want anybody to know who I am. I want it to be magical and mystical." Well, it's fine. It's still going to be magical and mystical when you do it. Right. When you do it, I'm just going to frame it so that people, ideally what I want is, my dream is that when people see us push down the street, that they go, "Oh yeah, I get what's going on there." Mm-hmm. Like I know that the work that we've done, which I'll elaborate more on, but like all of that work makes it so that skaters maybe get a little less hassled by the police. Or that people who would normally see them as a nuisance are like, whoa. You see that whole crew? When was the last time you seen a crew made up of so many different groups of people? right? Like, and I know that's happening. I know that that's what's happening. And truthfully, there was a piece that was on the front page of the LA Times in December. A writer, David Wharton, he asked me questions about skateboarding when he was covering the Olympics. So for those who were like, is the Olympics good, bad, whatever? Hey, he started this line of inquiry during the Olympics. He was covering it like a, sports reporter. Mm-hmm. But I was like, if you're going to ask me these questions, you really should be thinking about skateboarding in terms of social change, right? And as a cultural phenomenon. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, even if we just look at whose bodies are the ones that are skateboarding, right? It's not requiring this hefty body for football. All bodies can skateboard. In particular, that's when I actually talked to him about even those who we normally would consider disabled bodies, right? Like anyone who's been skating for a while also knows, like, hey, we've had skaters who didn't have the ability and use of their legs, for us, visible since the 90s. Yeah. And so I'm in talks with like Paralympic groups who are like, wait, what? Yeah. Right? That kind of visibility was in skate culture, in old 411s, right? So not to go down that too much, but to just say those were some of the conversations we're having, and we were looking at who's at the skate park, right? And who's at the street spots. So in both ways, he actually went out, like a good reporter that he is, and investigated. He went to Jaquan in LA and saw that as a space where black and brown bodies were using and taking up space in skating Jaquan, men and women and transgender skaters, which people were saying that wasn't allowed. But I think that in that particular argument, I think is depends on what day you go, right? Like those who'd been there for a while were actually really like, what? Everybody's skating here. And he went and was like seeing it over time, going like, oh no, everybody is here, right? And then I had him talk to Brianna and had him talk to some of my students who were running queer and female skate meetups. So for him, he was like an outsider just going like, all right, Neftalie's saying that there's something special in skateboarding. He would call me, all the time, like, how's this different than basketball? Or like, what's different than this in football, in that football, American football and proper football, right? So we really got at that for a while. And front page of the LA Times, the story is like, do skateboarders have the answers to what it looks like to build a diverse community? Wow. Right? And that's like, I'm not gonna lie, that's the front page of the LA Times. That's one of my students. And he just got to talk to them and ask them their own experiences. And he called me once, he's like, Neftalie, there was like a little kid who was at the park and had to skate in two instances, which under normal circumstances would be in the way. And older skaters who are obviously like good skaters, he said, I saw them, like they wait patiently. They wait patiently for them to take their turn. And the kids know like, oh wait, I can't just sit here all day. Okay, I have to move. He goes, so I'm seeing these patterns where like encouragement is there. And he goes, and I expected like maybe the women would be in this space, the guys would be in this space. And he said, you sit long enough and you see that everyone is talking together, but it doesn't have to be that everyone's talking at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's that everyone is sort of together and like noticing and seeing where folks are at. And he goes, and I saw tricks happening and I saw encouragement. And he goes, and it wasn't just that time, he went back and forth. So when you ask like, well, is this worth it? Like, trying to do skate research or trying to put skateboarding in a new position. Yeah, because that's somebody who's an outsider who now gets a chance to talk about our culture from outside in a way that's positive.
So you brought up sport diplomacy earlier. And I mean, I'm just curious to know, was there like a push or a pull factor? I mean, you're working for like the US government, so they're seeing skateboarding in this like new lens. We're seeing it completely like used as a tool, but I mean, this was pre-Olympics.
Yes, very much so.
So there wasn't that whole big, I mean, there's still a commercial edge to it. It's like at the forefront of pop culture, but also counterculture. Like, what was the main push and pull factor of using skateboarding? Like, did people take you seriously, or were they fully like, yeah, this is new, go for it?
No, it's, I fought for all things, for sure. I fought for my space in academia, fighting for my space, but I only say that not everyone at all times is on board with all things, right? So, and sort of to your question, like, how do I balance, like, working for the U.S. government, which at times does horrible things and does great things, and but that's being a U.S. citizen. So right. So that's like,
our taxes go.
Yeah. So
right. Do as much work as I can on this continent.
Okay. So that's also a thing, right? So for me, it's like, I guess to what I said earlier is like, the U.S. is still a state of possibilities. And that's what I sort of talked to the taxi driver today too, right? It's like, she's like, do you like being in the U.S.? Do you like being in Europe better? There's just always still the possibilities. Just like I started on the East Coast and I went to the West Coast to find the life I wanted. And I still go home and work on the East Coast too, to make sure that those skaters don't have to work as hard as I did, right? But the key is it was still in the U.S., right? So you have some haters and you have some supporters. And so when working with the U.S. government, it's a case of going them open to the idea and getting an understanding of like, okay, well, we do sports diplomacy and we do cultural diplomacy, and here's someone who's, majored in public diplomacy. So I will say one of the advantages I had, because I know there's sort of, a lot of people would like to do that job. I'll put that there, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't mind. I mean,
yeah. Like a lot of folks would like to do their job, but what I'll say is, it wasn't overnight. Like I had to earn that job.
Yeah.
And that was the deal of like, yes, you can go do this, like, but that's also was like the degree coming into place and understanding that what the role is. Like you're allowed, that's the thing about being American. You're allowed to critique America and American culture and all policies. And that's a freedom we have. And so that's also something that I'm very cognizant of, right? Like I worked in Cuba first before doing any envoy work. So it's, trying to navigate the way that you talk about the US and other countries, but being able to say like the freedom I have is the ability to critique and like decide like what works and what doesn't work. And you don't have that everywhere. And when I travel, I very much recognize that sometimes you don't have that in every place. But it is, to get to your piece a little deeper, people often ask me like, what is it like when you're working in like socialist state or a communist state, right? Versus, democratic state, how do you talk about skateboarding? We are very lucky because skateboarding allows us to explore all of those ideals. We're both individual, and collective. And we're aware of that collectivism, right? We're aware that you can interpret skateboarding as much as you want in your own individual manner, but you can also have a crew. And like when you're presenting something that's able to do both things, now you've got something special, right? And it's not about, for me, presenting skateboarding as this, like, I'm not telling these kids in different places that I want them to be an athlete, right? Because sports diplomacy is telling you sort of like a little bit more about being an athlete. What's wonderful is to be able to go to these places and work with their educational institutions or cultural institutions and say, actually, I just want your kids to go to school if school's there for them. Like, I want them to see skateboarding as a way that I became a doctor.
Well, right? From the inside what benefits it's brought you, and it's brought the culture and the culture you come from, and you want them to, as you said, like see it, someone rolling down the street and say, I know what's going on. I know that this is a positive force, instead of what so often put on the news of skateboarding is not a crime era. You know what I mean? Of like, is it's an excellent way of attracting negative attention if you're a skater in a public space or whatever. And it's very similar to, the projects again that we partner with, and specifically like Skateristan, which has completely changed the way that the communities in Afghanistan, for example, would look at skateboarders and include young girls in that culture as a nascent activity, as an activity which was not that was kind of unique as opposed to other sports, for example, which would have been not allowed. It
has that certain like malleability that you can use to present to like what kind of population do you really think like, hey, let's try this out.
And not having not having to fight the preconceptions, and in fact being able to start anew and to being able to point to, I wonder, do you ever point to those non-Western manifestations of skateboarding and say, hey, look, when there are no preconceptions or very few preconceptions about what skateboarding is as a culture based off of its West Coast roots or whatever, look how much of an amazing impact it makes on the culture as a whole, and you know how much. I assume Cuba was a massive force.
Yeah. So definitely that in Cuba. So I want to add, I'll just to frame Cuba in particular. When we first started working, even before I was at Cuba Skate, we'd done a research trip to Brazil. Now, of course, you know, in skateboarding, Brazil has an amazing skateboarding history in future. But at that time, I did an interview for this magazine called Epoca. And so the way that I was getting them to think about skateboarding was to first say, the way that I know Brazil is through the skateboarders that are there, right? But I also said, you could be a real powerhouse in the Southern Hemisphere, and as opposed to the US being the hegemon, Brazil could be this, because U.S.-Cuba relations are always strained, but Brazilian relationships in Cuba are not. And so for me, that discussion was, here's a way that Brazil could sort of lead that conversation, be the one that's building those bridges. And that wasn't a conversation that had occurred with them before. But then they went and then they started to interview some of the Brazilian skaters and found out, like, oh, these Brazilian skaters had already, like Sandro, had already been going to Cuba. And so that was new news for them and a way for them to rethink about skateboarding. But the thing that I always want people to do is reframe the way they think about their kids, their nieces, their nephews, you know, their sons and daughters, their gender non-binary family members, to be able to say, you've always been doing something special. I just didn't know that's what you were doing. And so that first mission was really just to like spark that, get that interest going. And there was something that funny that happened. We were meeting with some like legislators and heads of state in Sao Paulo, and they were presenting a video that talked about, like, this is Sao Paulo and this is the essence of Brazil, and it was like showing all these things, right? And you know, there's about, you know, maybe 10 people representing Sao Paulo, and in the video they have someone who's playing guitar, and they're doing an interview with him in the park, and he's like, Brazil is this, Brazil is this. There are two skaters skating the statue behind him during the whole video. And I'm just looking at that, and literally they stop the video and go, Neftalie, we just want to say we've never seen those two skaters in this entire time. We've played this video hundreds of times for folks. We have never seen them in the video. And now, because you were talking about who we are in a way that we weren't thinking about, we now see those skaters. And then after that, they were like, hey, have you been to Praca de Aguas? And that's like a spot that was a DIY spot that they're like, all of a sudden, everybody who was in, you know, all those legislators and ministerial folks were like, you know what, I've seen skateboarding going on here. And they gave that place to as a DIY spot, and you should check out here. So it was like jogging everybody's, you know, latent memories of the way skateboarding was around them, but they didn't have a way to connect it to their own work and their own interpretations of themselves. So like, that's like, Brazil was like, for me, like the testing point, like going to Brazil and going like, and tying in with 100% and Tulio and all of the, you know, all of the skaters there, but going, you're already being ambassadors. We just need the world to understand that you've been doing this heavy lifting and this heavy labor without the support, right? And so if I can be the one to translate that, so again, it makes other people's lives easier. So that was Brazil. Short version, doing that work in Cuba. I mean, you know, Miles will tell you should have Miles on too, but like those conversations, it's not easy to work in Cuba, right? Like, it's not easy for those skaters, and it's not easy to work in that. But what was malleable to your phrasing and thinking is, you know, the Cuban government, you know, tapped us on the shoulder and said, hey, you know, you're kind of not doing things the way that we do things. The state shall provide, right? Like, that's the deal. That's communism, right? And that's great. Like, the state shall provide. Like, hey, that's great.
Yeah.
But we also recognize, like, to go and be giving out boards and doing lessons and like building DIY things, like, that's going against the state shall provide. And so they were nice enough and have been continued to be good enough to recognize that something special was happening that was not necessarily Western US, right? They were able to go like, oh, these are our kids. This is not imperial sport, which I'm sure you all have to deal with here at the skate room. I'm sure you have to deal with that when people are thinking about skateboarding in new contexts, like, is this an imperial sport? Is this imperialism being pushed upon me? And in Cuba, they were able to say and go, no, these are our kids. It's helping our young people. And then part of that DIY collective, like they're building their own boards, right? Like pressing their own wood, their own graphics, their own things that contribute to the collectivism within Cuba. And so it's fulfilling a different role there, but it is also providing us a relationship between the U.S. and to other nations.
But it's a lesson we've also been taught through continuous support of various partners, and particularly those who build skate park facilities, is that there is the first wave of skate park building facilities was build a skate park, see what happens. And it's slowly skate park builders and construction NGOs like Concrete Jungle Foundation, for example, Wonders Around the World, who we're supporting this year, they're able to see that we have to go beyond that. That if you leave it there, you don't empower local people to take the culture into their hands and grow it into their hands. You actually you can even sometimes endanger the community by leaving the space. So what's amazing is through the Eduskate program or the Planting Seeds program, you have local people,
the most important,
becoming leaders in that, you know what I mean? And I think also free movement skateboarding also have this as a, we had Will on last week, and Zelia actually was previously worked with free movement. And knowing that the importance of having local staff and to allow people to move up through the program and begin to guide their own culture. Because people do look at it and see, is it being pushed upon us, or is it being...
especially when it's, I mean, to be honest, in a lot of places, especially when it's white faces that are doing this, right? Like that's always going to be seen. And I can take it out of that context for a minute. Even building a skate park in Los Angeles, depending on who's the person that is initiating that idea, hey, they're like, well, you know, if this person doesn't look like my community, but they're telling us that skate parks are good for them or good for my kids, like, no, I want my kids to play football, or I want them to play basketball, or I want them to play this thing that I know and that I understand. That's just easier to do, right? Like, I have to have a leap of faith to allow you in the community. And so that is one of the most important parts of what you're all doing with your work is making sure that is it. That's a central part of, you know, truly being on my academic side, but like that's an integral part of any public diplomacy mission, is like, how is it sustainable, right? How is it recognized? How is it taken in? And then how do you adjust? And also, how do you not take it personal if it doesn't take hold? How do you not go, why aren't you getting it? Well, there may be other factors that are going on, you know?
And so the artists we work with, like incredible people that we meet, and they're inspired by the causes that they're involved in, and you don't want to see something which next year doesn't work anymore. You know, it's a legacy as well for people who are involved in this activity, which is what's so beautiful about it, is that you're connecting people from all different walks of life to come together for a single goal, or even a goal that fractals and diversifies and becomes multiple different ripples in a society or a community or whatever. And I think that's really beautiful as well. No,
you're 100% right, and that always goes to the part of like what were you saying earlier. For me, it's not about skaters becoming athletes. It's a utilitarian tool for transportation. And some places, if it that's the gig. That's what it is, right? Like that's my core foundation. We don't need to impose or do anything. It's just like, hey, if you made it so that people could get to work, young people can move, old people can get to work, or like that, if we did that, we did something. Right? Like that's a win. And so that's also like really, again, good when you're like with Skateistan in particular, like being able to have this sort of blank slate that at its core, it is transportation. It is mobility.
Or expression. The randomness of it. Like art, right? It's like you can do nothing, or you can do, or you
something as futile as like 100 ollies in a day.
Exactly.
Nobody's gonna care.
Or just fall over loads.
And have fun.
Or doodle all day, like with art, right? Mess up. But the point is that you expressed yourself, and that's enough. Like that's what it's about. You don't have to win gold at the Olympics, which we are now going to talk about.
Oh, wait, but I want to add to that too.
Sorry, go on.
No, because I do want to add to that too, is because like, you know, when I was in Cuba, there was a gentleman who was just working at the hotel, and he'd seen us do a bunch of skate stuff, and then he was like, hey, like how do you do that? And I was like, oh, he's probably like maybe in his 50s. And I was like,
I
was like, I taught him the same way I teach everyone is like, I had him stand on the board and held his hands, two grown men holding hands, holding each other up to make this happen.
Yeah.
And boom, we started rolling down the front of the hotel, just back and forth. And just the pure joy on his face of like, I just did something. I just did something I was rolling, and like that's it. It's like even if it's just rolling, like that was just him finding out another way to like interface with the world. Like he just rolled.
No context of
nothing
of any pro skater and how good you can be and how therefore insignificant that thing that you just did. But what's amazing is it's not.
Yes,
it's perfect. It's incredibly significant. Every motion.
And in that same vein, so that was like the utilitarian part. However, there were moments where I was pushing around Cuba, and some older brothers stopped me and they just talked to me. We were talking in Spanish for a little bit, but the core was they said, "You look like freedom," and they're like, and that is like, now remember, this is in this particular instance, like, I'm African American, and they're like, obviously these are Afro-Cuban guys who came up to me and were talking about this, but it wasn't just like, one, I'm skateboarding, my hair is long. There's there's the $5 Cuban haircuts, like all of the things the ways I was expressing myself, both in clothing, dress, all this, just to hear that, like, you look like freedom, like that was a lot, but also like a reminder that, we're only 70 miles apart. Yeah. And like it makes the mission that Miles, that Miles has done with Cuba Skate, like, that much more important, that these were people who were not skating, they were just witnessing / seeing it and thinking about that. But again,
they felt it without even doing it.
Yeah, they saw and they were like, look at that movement. Yeah. Right? Look at that movement. And that's nice. But again, always being fair, not saying that there's any, they're just living in a different way, and that's not putting any judgment calls, but that's them saying it looked like something different. Yeah. And the truth is, it is something different. Yeah.
Wow.
So I know you're going to go to the Olympics. I see this coming. Go ahead.
I'm going to give Zelia the.
Can I take a sip? Pause for the sip.
Take a second for a sip.
Okay, sorry, I knew this was going to happen, right? Like, that's why we can't start with the home life question. No home life, because it's just too deep. The story is just too much stuff. So I'd say chop all that home life.
We're done with the therapizing. Now we can
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Zelia, I leave you the College Skateboarding Education Foundation scholarship thing. I think that's a nice place to jump into.
Yeah, we'll talk about football, but in the American sense.
Oh, that's great.
I will not understand a word.
That's good. That's great. My wife is in charge of the football for the house, so she can talk to her. Ooh, she knows she will set you straight.
Dutch, right?
Yeah, yes. She's half Dutch and American, but she's
so
from California.
We're talking about British soccer?
No, she was saying American football, so I said you need to talk to my wife to straighten you up.
No,
she'll tell you all the things because she's the sports person in the house.
Fair.
That's great.
All right, so we didn't touch on Olympics yet, but just to dibble-dabble in it a little bit. We talked about a little bit your academic career. You also started the College Skateboarding Educational Foundation, so you're supporting skaters on their way to college. Yeah. College in the U.S. is a completely different story than university here in Europe. You got students going into a lifetime of debt right after. So that's really incredible that you're supporting financially. Thanks. I don't know if it's you personally.
No, it's me.
If it is.
No, not as
all your fundraising.
Yes. Hey, quick shout out to Joe Biden for actually eliminating some student debt today.
Pell Grant,
yeah,
finally.
Yeah, we of course need more because school is very, 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 very expensive, but it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And if school was free, we wouldn't need the College Skateboarding Educational Foundation. But it's not free in the U.S., so we need every bit that we can get. So
yeah, we're taking painfully small baby steps, but
it's
a step still.
Yes.
But with all of that going on, especially in the aftermath of the Olympics, you probably have school or university administrators coming up to you saying how do we get in on this sport? Is this as much of a money ball as we might think it is after seeing it on millions and millions of TVs worldwide? Could there be national university skateboarding teams? Could skateboarding even offer a way as a scholarship outside of your organization, but even just how public institutions might recognize it and say like, hey, this could fund your way to getting an education.
Okay, so that's a lot of, I'm gonna break that into separate things. Okay, one, I'll just say for College Skateboarding Educational Foundation, shout out to Keegan and Tammas and the rest of the boys that are the rest of the squad that's over there. That came about from just saying like, hey, the price of college is out of control in the United States, and as a way for us to think about the stereotypes that are attached to skateboarding, right? So this is another tool, another way for us to think about like, hey, the world thinks about skateboarders in this one way, and we know that we are multifaceted because skateboarding may be our identity, but just one part of our lives, right? So starting CSEF was to show skaters that they could go to school and not have to it just be you're either a pro skater or you go to school. Like to say, no, there's other skaters who've gone to school and you can still have your skate identity. And we want to just show you that we are always a family in skateboarding. So that's sort of the impetus to get it started. And in the beginning, like, scholarships are small. $1,000, for like, when we initially had the first like 10 grand, $1,000 going out to 10 different skaters. But it hadn't happened in that way, right? It hadn't happened before. You weren't going to get a scholarship based on you skating and wanting to pursue higher education. But we wanted that to be a way to kickstart it and to get people to see like, oh yeah, that's actually something we should be doing. And in my work at the university, I always say it sort of works in 3 different ways. I want young skaters to see that skateboarding can be in academia and there's a place for them, that the university is responsive to them. I want the skateboarding industry to see that they should be building bridges with academia, because that's also a place where we deserve to be there. We deserve to be working with we've been building an entire multi-billion-dollar industry for decades. Like, of course we deserve to be there. We did it on our own, right?
Every film, whenever they want to show a group of like cool people,
it's
like, come on, it's a cultural icon. Like it's literally used to delineate that.
Yeah. So that's a bridge that we should be building, right? But also getting the skateboarding industry to understand that we also want to have young skaters who are going to school to change the face of the skateboarding industry and skateboarding culture, because you only know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. So the more skaters that we ever going to school or experiencing life across a myriad of different environments, we want all of that in skateboarding. So that goes back to CSEF, is like helping seed that, right? Skaters who are artists, but also skaters who are neuroscientists. So like we're funding all of that, so that later on in life, when it could be something as simple as later on in life, people go like, oh, should there be a skate park built in our neighborhood? No, there should be no skate park built in our neighborhood. You find out your next door neighbor who's the neuroscientist that you thought was great was like, oh, I'm a skater, or I used to skate. Like, of course there should be a skate park. This is how I got to this. This is how I got to this position. So in this way, it's like always just moving in a reciprocal manner, and it's always having sort of that conversation. So that's the point of CSEF, to take care of skateboarders and to set a precedent of what taking care of skateboarding and skateboarders looks like. So now there are people like, a lot of different brands have been now sponsoring us or sponsoring the crew and working with them. And matter of fact, Amelia Brodka, pro skater who runs Exposure, the largest female and women and queer identifying skateboarding contest.
Amazing.
Yeah, like Amelia, who's like fantastic. She's been to class a number of times. Like, they set up a separate scholarship just for young women and gender non-binary folks with CSEF too. So this is a way for us to be thinking about who we are, how we can bring in all of our skate identities and all of our other identities in together. So that's like the role of CSEF. Now to the rest of your question. Do people think now the Olympics, we're on Olympics, is there millions of dollars, like rain coming from the skies? Like yeah, maybe sort of, but like most folks honestly are like still like in shock that we were there to begin with. So it's still got to like permeate. That's a thing that I think is more like, that's 2028, but it is happening in my role in academia. Like before we went to the Olympics, I can say this. I had a talk with a former athletic director, and the athletic director was like, "Oh, skateboarding, like we don't do skateboarding at the university." And I said, "Oh, but it's going to be an Olympic sport. And
is this at USC?
Yeah, and I can say this. I mean, yes, it is. I was trying to decide. But again, it's the former athletic director.
It's a pretty big spot.
Yeah. So yes,
pretty iconic place to find a team.
Yes. Okay, but see, I don't want to bias anything. So I have to be very. This is the diplomat in me, right? So at all times, yes, it was that conversation then. That athletic director is no longer there, so it doesn't matter. So there we go. It's back to normal. But that athletic director, I want you to think about how it shifted. The conversation was, we don't do skateboarding here. Like, that's not a sport. That's not a thing. And this person is in charge of all sports. However, when I said, this is but it's going to be in the Olympics at that time in Tokyo 2020, which I was having that conversation in 2015. The person said, whoa, we build Olympians. Now that's a thing that USC is a claim to fame. So yes, I can say that on record. Of course, USC builds Olympians, and part of the narrative of USC when you're doing the tour for USC, they say we have more gold medals than like any country. Like that's like part of actually the narrative how the school sells itself. That we have more combined medals than any other place. We are sport excellence. Yeah. But I had to remind the person at Sport Excellence, like, hey, that's your job, right? Like just getting you prepped, you can thank me later, right? So there is that. So there is that change.
You're going to need to take a notice of this because in a bit you're going to be too late.
Yeah. So don't blow it.
Yeah.
But that was a former athletic director, and I haven't had to talk since I've been home yet. But we'll talk more. But it did get everybody ready, and I can also say USC is amazing, and the reason they were amazing is that I can just tell you the truth. They raised me. It's in that space that I saw public diplomacy, and that I saw that skate diplomacy could be a thing, that I saw that there was a space in the room for our life to be recognized. So I learned that from being there. So, when we say that value in education, I mean, that was the value. I wouldn't be having any of these talks or conversations and seeing that skateboarding was doing something that the world was trying to accomplish in the first place. And then back to that question of teams and all of that happening. The short answer is, all of that will happen over time. Yeah. But those are systems. The NCAA in the US, right? Like that's the Collegiate Athletic Association. Like all of that stuff takes time, and it has to be vetted, and that's just like it's a whole nother ball of wax. Now, it's happening. And I just had a conversation with someone who works for Sports Illustrated and NFL, and we were talking about historically black colleges in the U.S. Right, that's another thing that's different. Right, historically black college is not as different than the unis here. Right, so within this institution, they were asking me, well, where is skateboarding fitting, and should we be thinking about that as the next avenue for black athletes? And so one of those institutions just added gymnastics for the first time. So gymnastics is everywhere in all these other institutions, but within the historically black universities, like one of their first programs just happened. They just had like their second practice the other day. So like that shows like disparities in ways in which who's allowed to participate in sport and what are those historic narratives. So now that gymnastics was breaking free, well, now that reporter was asking me, like, should we be thinking about skateboarding in this way? And as a matter of fact, Neftalie, I'd like to introduce you to some of the presidents of those schools, because I didn't know that skateboarding had been a place where black and brown identities could be celebrated. When we're fighting fights about Colin Kaepernick having a job, now I'm in U.S. context, but like when we're fighting fights about whose bodies we're allowed to celebrate, and like everybody wants to labor from these black and brown bodies. Nobody wants to know anything about where they came from or the music that they like or the life that they lead, right? Because these are businesses, these are systems. So when I'm introducing in skateboarding, Chris Pastras has said it before, was that if Colin Kaepernick was, protesting and kneeling during the national anthem in NFL, if that was happening in skateboarding, he would have had the best-selling skateboard. Right? Because we see this as a place of empowerment. We see this as a place that should always be countering. Right, that is always pushing those envelopes. And so again, why I want us to always be careful when we're flipping about skateboarding, because like, hey, there's empowering things that are happening and that are not as opposed to these other places. So now I'm talking to people from historically black colleges who are like, maybe skateboarding is exactly what we need to do. Maybe we need to have all of our kids stop playing football and have them all become skateboarders. So that's, but that's a long answer to your question. But yes, the future is coming and I see a lot that's happening, but I also truthfully want to be involved in all those conversations too, so that those things don't go awry, right?
Because you can see certain, like the recent news that members of the US team pushed away from the US team. Like, I don't know the context and how it's developed most recently, but do you have thoughts on that as already a signal of something which can raise concern in you? Like, and do you think that's part of the fact that skateboarding is not used to being on that global sporting stage, and thus has much less patience for the types of systemic issues that exist in the global sporting stage?
I would excuse me. Sorry, I'll have to cut for there for 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. To answer that, yes, there was a mass exodus, or sort of exodus that just occurred, and that's 3 separate questions. So for one of those questions, I will say, yes, are skateboarders used to being within like such a big system? No. That's the short version. And as we saw, there's many people who were boycotting skateboarding being in the Olympics in the first place. But I also, for that boycott of the Olympics, you have the right to feel however you feel. So, I mean, I'm living a different life than everybody else. So
that's opinion, really.
Right. So totally fine. But having worked, if we are a skateboarding family, having worked in skateboarding in multiple contexts, I do understand how I just want to open up the possibility for people to understand that skateboarding operates differently in other places, and sometimes having a sanction, like having a sports structure helps them to think about all sports and all activities. So that's just how they operate. And so if skaters would like to have a skate park or have some space, they have to show that they could be recognized within some system that exists. Now, maybe that's not the greatest, but like, it's the life and the reality that they live under. So it's very important in those for skateboarding to be recognized as an Olympic sport. And truthfully, when I was having those conversations in Cuba, that's the reason they also let us operate, because they were like, this is a thing. Cuba's very much in the sport. And so if there's an opportunity, right, they rest a little of their historical narrative on sport, and they're very proud of that, and they should be proud of that. And so if this is a chance for them to, again, to my core thing, which is the core caveat for adults to see their young people in a different way and see them as themselves, well, then we did something.
Amazing,
right? Because now they're like, we're going to let you do this because this might be an Olympic sport, and we want our young people to be celebrated, and we want to celebrate them, and we did not know how to celebrate them without this. Because to us, it's just sort of this rebel activity and a space where if the state shall provide, well, we provide sport because we believe in sport. So there's nothing wrong with that. So sometimes that translation, it needs to occur. So you can have your personal opinions about it, but just, I guess, I hope that everyone recognizes that comes from where our own privileges are, So, and it's still fine. You can boycott and hate it. Right. And also people did sort of resign the other day. So there's a tension in that.
Teething problems, do we say, or do we say something more serious? I mean, it's like, I don't know, but it's just a super interesting thing to examine, because 2024 is coming past and 2028. And it's a fascinating thing to see how that maybe the Olympics has to fit around skateboarding to a degree rather than skateboarding fitting around the Olympics. And that's a question as it becomes more of a,
well, I want to bring this to the table, is that, hey, so folks know they were. Like, I'm going to put that out there for real. Like, hey, they were trying very much to be very accommodating in ways that I'll just be honest with you, like having known and been involved, like, so many different groups or things that I'm involved in, like they were. They were actually trying. So this is for all skateboarders, for all of our family to know, like, hey, it wasn't just this institution just trying to like just grab. They already, from the scholarly spot, they already ran into that with snowboarding. They did not want people like when Terje Hawkinson, when snowboarders boycotted the first Olympics, like that was a debacle for them. So they didn't want that to happen again. And the most important part for them was to go, how do we make this go smoothly? And I'll say the first thing that we threw up, truthfully, on our side as skaters, is like they were like, oh no, there's no governing body. You all haven't like at least sorted out who you kind of want to represent yourselves if this was happening. Like, oh man.
And it was a big issue in many countries of people scrabbling, and you have situations where certain people who are representing
UK
certain
particular.
Countries. Yeah, there are some incredible people, Skateboard GB, Lucy Adams, for example, just shout out. But also then you have, like, for example, other countries where people who are not involved in skateboarding have grabbed it because they were organized and ready. And so it's like it's going to be community to community a completely different
way. And that's what I want. I hope that skaters can understand is that, like, you know, just like all the contexts are different, and that we are skateboarders. And I will also say this is like, it is our job to fight these things, right? That is the deal. So you always want things to be, however, I look at skateboarding as always being a progressive space. And when we are not being progressive, we are not doing skateboarding. Whenever we are locking somebody out or not being inclusive or saying this is this or this, you're not doing skateboarding. You're just doing regular people shit. That's what I.
Amen.
That's what I see.
Fully
you just being you being fully pedestrian.
Yeah.
Like woo, don't do this. Not in my. Oh,
you can't skate,
man. Right. And so, like, I use that as a guiding principle, and also we should always be taking the stage, like, even in this conversation right now, like, I'm not giving you every answer I think maybe you might have thought I might have given, right? Like, we're always, it's like always our spot to like seize those moments and do the thing that is the right thing and not let anything off the hook. But like also recognize context too, so we're not like, it's the thing I tell my students, like, also read the room, know the context, fight all of the fights that matter for that moment, for that bit of progress. But like, don't just fight to fight, you know, for nothing. Like, don't even waste your energy in that. Like, be smart, be strategic. So, but to that, in the Olympics, like, it means different things in different contexts. It meant a different thing in Brazil, right? And we saw the repercussions, like the benefits of that. Brazil's, you know, when I did my trip, there was different folks in charge. I can say that. So, you know, I also always hope for the best in all the countries that these are, that everyone's operating in. And so, I don't know, it's the Olympics. As I tell my students, the Olympics operate on a set of ideals. And I would say that to Tammas Bach now. Whether or not the Olympics lives up to all of those ideals all the time, thoroughly, 100%, they will ask them, right? I know that there's a dream of what it's supposed to be, but it doesn't always do that. So we need to fight and hold them accountable. If we're going to take that stage and we're going to be part of this, then we need to just say, hey, you have it right here. Like, I literally show my students the Olympic ideals so that they can pull those apart and say, this actually seems really great. This seems perfect. So, like, if it's not doing that, well, then it's not doing its job. And hold everyone accountable. You're not doing your job. If it's not sustainable, if it's not making gender equity, if it's leaving the world worse than it was before. So skateboarding, I think skateboarding should be standing on those stages all the time, because we have the ability to, like, call those things out and do it in a productive manner, right? And also, you know, there's a journal article I just did on the Olympics. And what I was doing was interviewing skaters of color in the U.S. who were on the team, and for the 2020-2021 team. When you read that, you'll also see that there's also a different responsibility, particularly for people of color, with the Olympics. And that is like, what is it to represent your nation? What is it to represent? Like, it's just not the same. It's not the same. Like, you're carrying historic weight, historic baggage while you're also doing that. So yeah, you're a skateboarder, but like, you're not a white middle class skater who comes from this sense. Like, no, you might be representing a whole bunch of other things. You know, just like Alana Smith with having they them on their board, right? Like, you're representing these things. You're having this deeper conversation. So like, that's a great conversation to have. And again, that falls under the Olympic ideals that you should be doing those kinds of things. So, you know, I feel skateboarding should be on every platform. It should be in every art discussion about art. It should be in every discussion about social change. It should just be everywhere, because anyone could be a skateboarder. So why would we be limiting ourselves? Because we know something special is going on here. So like, you can limit yourself if you want to, but again, like if you feel like that, that's cool. You can stay home if you want, but some of us are gonna be out in the streets.
I really, like you said, in every discussion about art, obviously the skate room really is art, skate, social change.
Very much.
We've talked a lot about skateboarding. We've talked a lot about social change. Where does art fit into your life, and where does it fit into your relationship with skateboarding? What you approach this in such an academic way, but how much of it really is indescribable? Is expression, good. Creative. Spirit.
So this is, I always nerd out, so I'm just gonna say it. But when we were defining action sports as a whole yesterday with my class, we were talking about what's that difference is when that joy and expression, when that is the actual function. Mm-hmm. And so that is the joy, or that's what's beautiful in skateboarding. So every aspect of it is that self-expression, except for those moments when it's just utilitarian pushing down the street. But even in that, it's still a joy to push down the street, because it's always better than walking, right? So you've now changed that.
Unless it's uphill.
Right, well, unless it's uphill, yeah. But then you need these quads, right? That's so I still got to do that
Mega
too.
Legs.
Right, I got to do that too. So the way art sits for me is like, I want young people to not care about being the best skater. I want them to just see skateboarding as a platform for their artistic expression in whatever that is. If that's them deciding to become an engineer, if that's for them to see it as simply a medium to put their artistic physical expression through, or to put their artwork on, that's what makes it special. And that's why I can have a different conversation than I have with sports sociologists and sports academics, because they don't have that space. There is only the sport and sport for the platform to talk about social change, but there is not the mode of expression, because it's just a jersey. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it's a jersey that's predetermined. Every skateboard has the ability to be its own medium, its own canvas for someone to take charge of every single time, right? That's what's special, and that's without getting involved in anything else. That's just to go, I like this canvas, I like the shape of this canvas, I like that this canvas is also this utilitarian thing. Like, whoa, never had a canvas do that before, right? So like, that's what's incredible, and that's sort of that's how I feel about skateboarding. And then my personal bit, like, it's given us the ability to put every aspect of ourselves into this inanimate object. And so, I look to skaters like Chris Pastris and Stereo, and just really, I mean, when Blueprint was around, I used to love Blueprint out of the UK, but just, it's given us an ability to be ourselves in a way that traditional sport doesn't allow us to do, to let every aspect of ourselves really like bleed into it. And I wouldn't have found photography without skateboarding. Mm-hmm. And that's like, I mean, I don't say often, but I mean, I'm a photographer. That's why I brought all this gear with me on this trip. And I definitely was debating between the iPhone and bringing all my gear, right? It was like, oh no, I have to bring it all, right? right? Like, because that's who I am, and I wouldn't.
You should get a flight case, man.
Oh yeah, that's it. But like, I get to do this now. I want to add one other part. So I have a chapter in a new book that's out, that's coming out with Smithsonian in November, and that is like skateboarding, Gordon Parks, and me. It's just a little essay that I wrote. Gordon Parks, if you don't know, is a very famous African-American photographer whose work is like phenomenal. If you Google it, those who are Googling to figure this out, you'll know a lot of those photos. So Gordon Parks was amazing and a big inspiration for me, because Gordon Parks was a black photographer who chose to shoot everything at a time when people were not, first of all, there were very few black photographers in traditional print media, and then to be able to shoot everything when he was doing the stories of polio in Brazil, but also shooting, drug kingpins in Chicago and urban life in that way, and putting real like faces to that plight, but also just shooting beautiful black life and also shooting, Vogue. And so for that is what I got out of why he's such a big inspiration is Gordon was, a whole human being and using the medium to document all of, every bit of humanity, right? So like documenting social change, documenting the need for social change, shooting during the civil rights movements, shooting segregation. Those images, when you all look them up, that's what you're going to see. That is that particular time in history. But he also shot Vogue and also was free to like shoot, beautiful people. Yeah. And I will say when I was getting I got also a lower degree in photography, there was always the discussion of like, oh, you should be shooting Black life and Black plight. And I was like, oh, whoa. Just because I'm Black and have access to these things, like I would like to shoot Vogue too. Yeah. Like why is that job somebody else's, right? Like these are the ways in which like where bias and discrimination and like everyday sort of racism and discrimination kick in to like what you should be doing. And Gordon meant so much to me because he did everything. And so that's why I was shooting. So I want to shoot skateboarding, but I also shoot beautiful people and shoot art and shoot in all these manners. Mm-hmm. And so, that chapter talks about like I shot, at that time, a very young Samaria Brevard at one of the women's at the time Superwoman contests, and that for me like was always I have an eye towards our young folks of color at all times. So that's just I wouldn't be that without skateboarding, without knowing that without seeing like we don't just skateboard, like we can do art in all these ways. And it wasn't just Black artists who inspired me that way. I mean, we can go back to like OG days with like Neil Blender just doing things, right? So, or Mark, of course, Mark Gonzalez and the paint pens and seeing that you could be all things and be a skateboarder. So like art is an intrinsic part of skateboarding, but also it could just be a medium or canvas and have that meaning too. Long answer, but like,
yeah.
That's what you get. I just got off the plane.
Well, you have just got off the plane. Before we kind of get into the last questions, because I've completely lost track of time. It's been so fascinating. Yeah. Anyway,
so no, sorry.
But maybe no, it's been amazing, man. But maybe I don't know, Zelia, if you want to ask a bit about Malmo, and we can go into that a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Before.
So okay,
tell us about it.
Yeah. So one, I just want to thank, of course, USC, because USC funding these trips with my position there as a Provost Post-Doctoral scholar, but also Yale, because I also work at Yale, the Yale Schwarzman Center, and I'm a visiting fellow for race, culture, and community there. So combined, they've both been really interested in, for me, my area of inquiry in this trip is to go, how do we design skate-friendly cities? How do we see skateboarding as a place that can be social change on a number of fronts, right? How do we make it accessible for everyone to think about skateboarding as a mode of transportation, right? When the cities are congested, particularly in Los Angeles, like where we're figuring out how do we just do these new modes, right? What is an accessible city? So this trip was really focused on meeting up with Gustav from Skate Malmo, and all of the crews over there. John.
For context, let's say Gustav is a fish. Is it? You probably know better than me, but when I first met Gustav, he is literally the member of parliament for skateboarding, the equivalent, and ensures that public spaces in Malmo are skatable, and if they aren't skatable, they're not skatable in a friendly way, like you have grass instead of skate spotters, things like that, right? Maybe
yes,
you can
very
talk
much
more
so.
To that.
Yeah, no, he actually took me on a tour yesterday of all the skate spots that they've got built. So there's two things that happen, or not all the spots, but a lot of the spots. So with Gustav in his role is like he is the representative for the city, for the parliament, thinking about skateboarding and building accessible spaces. But I want to also say shout out to Pontus and that whole crew. Gustav was really great at getting me to understand, hey, Neftalie, this all comes from Malmo being a DIY city, and that's intrinsic to skateboarding culture, right? Building up what we want to see in the world, from not just on board graphics, but what we want to see within the city, and saying like these are city spaces, and I'm a citizen, so I'm going to use this, right? And I'm going to create that. So he also was really good at just explaining to me like the DIY aesthetic, which is deep in skateboarding's roots, is very much alive within the city, and that allowed it to become something to be recognized. And I think that that's really important because I didn't know that and didn't make that connection. And so that's also good for all skaters to understand is like, how do we elevate our DIY? How do we become that city representative?
How do you get to the point where you're able to fly the ruins of Philadelphia's Love Park to your city to set it up so that skaters in Malmö can skate the destroyed Philadelphia Love Park? Like that to me is an absolutely mind-blowing place, that a legendary place in skateboarding is now in Malmö. Because of the scene there, DIY being able to inspire that level of it's amazing. Madness to me.
no, it's and so you know, I have my skate hat on sometimes, I have my academic hat on, and sometimes I have my diplomat hat on. So from the diplomat side, that's also city diplomacy at its core. Like city and cultural diplomacy are like, how do we build an exchange? How do we get people to think about themselves connected to a larger global citizenry? So it's like us as skaters, but like, again, tapping into our bits is like, no one would want the ledges from Philadelphia if they weren't already connected. Nobody would want those things. They would just be junk or only important to citizens of that community. But because we are having this international global language and communication happening through skateboarding culture, it has a cultural value, right? And that's a cultural value that the city didn't know, right? But this is our job to elevate that conversation. So it's not just that there's this exchange, it's that it belongs to us, and this is a blueprint for more things that cities should be doing. We now actually fit into the repertoire of regular city diplomacy that regularly sends art back and forth. And so the other part that I looked at that he was doing that was literally, when he told me this part, I had to get on the plane. This was the decision. When he was like, we've been sending our skatable sculptures, we've been sending them back and forth to Bordeaux, and we're also working in Toronto. And I was like, that's it.
Really, I literally, like galleries trading art. It's a really amazing thing.
I literally was like I said, that's it. I'm booking my ticket now. All of this is important in so many ways to cities and the nation states, but to cities and the way they interact with their citizenry. And all of this is the way that we want our young people to think of themselves. This is the same conversation that I would have right now, like with the rest of the EU, right? With the European Commission is like, this is the goal, is to have everyone feel like to be part of the EU is to think of yourselves as a European citizen, but the truth is in this is like, hey, we did monetary policy, but then we got rid of Erasmus, right? So like, we want people to have a shared currency, but it's more important they have a shared identity, which we have in the U.S. as a shared identity amongst the states. They're still the U.S. So we want to encourage those things. So we should be funding and supporting all of these endeavors because they do the job that someone with a much higher salary than all of us in this room has. They're looking for those endeavors, and skateboarding is doing those things. So Mama was ripping. Sorry.
Well, and you've also got people who maybe start skateboarding as a means of expression or a means of getting themselves into a community, who then get into the culture and then they see the endless amounts of videos from, for example, Philadelphia's Love Park, and they think, wow, amazing, but I will never get a chance to skate that because I don't have the means, I don't have the finances or the ability to travel even for a lot of people. And with this exchange, you're literally bringing the cultural materials
artifacts
to these people and vice versa, and that trading is incredible. I mean, to be able to say that you could skate the same, and I do wonder whether the Love Park concrete or any of these skatable structures which have a legendary status will just keep going until they are literally ground down to a nub.
Oh man,
that's a beautiful
thought. That's a beautiful thought, to have that much presence within the city for so long. Like, I saw the pieces like as he was touring me around that Alexis Sablon did, and what was there in the plaza, and how that's become both the meetup spot, but now like part of that dialogue. And so of course, like, Alexis is from New England. She's from back home from me, so I love that.
Architect, professional skateboarder.
Yes, from MIT. She's amazing. And part of my work with Yale is a medium-sized city, just like Malmö is. And so I'm working with There's Elijah Anderson, famous scholar, famous urban sociologist, absolutely incredible work. And then I'm working with Elihu Rubin, and he's the undergrad director of architecture and design program for Yale. Yes, we can be excited about that, because this is the conversations that he's trying to have about what do we do with the old armory that's in New Haven. These big structures that had a use that would be wonderful places to be skated, wonderful places of community engagement. And what does that look like, and what can that be? So this trip was really to think about, like, what does Yale and what does the New Haven community, what can they learn from Malmo? What can Los Angeles learn from Malmo? How can I also, as a diplomat between these spaces, how do I get this exchange happening in our cities? And how do we let it be beyond just the artifacts? I met with Elihu's class, his architecture and design class, and this is just the best thing. He's introducing me to students, and one of his colleagues, or one of the students says, "Hey, professor, did you know, that one of the students was building a skate park?" Ready? The skate park is within the building. She was building housing, but like the fourth floor is a skate park that you can see from the ground, from ground level. Not to give away too much stuff, because she was going to be bringing this out, but like it was just amazing concept. And I was like, no way. He said, I didn't even know she was doing that. So we went over, and she's like, hello, and I'm literally in tears, because it is the building as sculpture, right? Because that is what she's taking in, is like how the bowl is designed so that it is sculpture, so that it is art from the street level, but it is also functional, and it is also housing.
That's an architect.
Yeah, and that's right. So like, right. She's an architect, I'm not an architect. So, and I hadn't seen it in this way, where she was like, oh, I'm just solving problems, and I'm like, I'm going to start crying. You need to come to LA. And so she already came to visit in LA, and like, we'll be coming back out. But like, because for me, like in LA, as opposed to other places, there is no space. There is no space. But you need as much multi-use space as possible. So that is like a dream design that needs to start tomorrow. And then also, Malmo's already doing this, because it's already thinking about the city as the space. It's like, what are the skatable structures? What is the role, right? What is the role of art? What is the role of public engagement in mixed use space? Gustav has a different philosophy, which is different than my role as a member of the Tony Hawk Foundation / the Skatepark Project. Right, which is thinking about how do we build more skate parks, and around the world, but in the U.S. But is also now thinking, how do we use skateboarding as an advocacy tool in numerous ways? How does a skate park become more? Which they funded the first skate study to go, this is what's happening at skate parks that the world wants to do. So that's wonderful. But now we're going, okay, well, how do we expand from that? How do we use this as a way for empowerment for different groups in different ways? How do we mobilize? And how are we the strongest advocacy group that can be out there? So all of this research now touches on every aspect of what I'm doing there. Also, I'm the chair of diversity, equity, inclusion, for, the USA Skateboarding. And so, I'm thinking about all of these roles, like, what does it mean when I'm in my diplomatic role? What does it mean as an educator? What does it mean, as understanding how marginalized groups get power within the city? So
yeah. I mean, you carry all these different hats within your role, like especially in the skate community. You're an academic, a diplomat, you're a skater, you're a photographer. Like, we bring it all together. How does that carry through in the classroom? Like, I'm thinking especially of the students that are non-skaters. How does this vision of this global skate community that you were talking about, this vision of bridging the skate culture to big institutions, so that the people that are in these institutions are able to kind of lift the fog, put on the reading glasses, and see like, hey, they're the skaters out. Here's what they're doing. Well, here's how we're already connected.
No, you're right. Well, okay, so the short version, if I ever do anything short, but the short version is that was the importance of the first skate studies, and then our second skate study, mattering at the margins, so that we actually had the real hard data, so that educators and administrators within academia could go, oh, this is how what they do translates to our lives, and what we do is take care of young people. So we should be taking care of them. We didn't know that they are also engineers, or that they were also thinking in ways that we would like them to think. And so that's just like the small bit of opening their eyes by having the research that does that, the hard sciences, so for them to understand that this is part of their job and role and responsibility, changing that. Then for my role in the classroom, I try not to give too much away from the class, but what I do is let them see that skateboarding and action sports culture as a whole as an ecosystem. And I tell them always, this class is not about skateboarding. It's not about action sports. What it is about understanding how ecosystems work and where everyone is situated, so that you can use your knowledge of how things are situated, positionalities, so that you can make change within any organization. And I said, we just had the first class the other day for this semester. Literally, it is the same talk always. When you leave this class, you'll be able to go and be placed anywhere and recognize where the power is, who's doing the job that is desperate for a new idea, and every day they go to work and they're like, man, if I just had a new idea to help do this. Or the people who have new ideas but no access, or those on the top level who are like, we've got to do something big and bold, but they are not connected with the people who are doing grassroots connections. So we use skateboarding culture and action sports culture as an actual lens to look at an entire ecosystem and break it down and go, this person, I'll just say from my position, Neftalie's a photographer, or this person's a photographer, they're situated in this space. Here's how they're connecting and doing these things. Are they all, what ways, what opportunities and areas where they could be connected in other ways? What's the other thing they wish they could do? Oh, these are pro skaters who see life through this lens, but they want to like also do more or figure this out. How do we connect all of these people, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what's special about, I'll say it to the camera, that's what's special about going to school, is you have the opportunity to test and pilot these things, and it doesn't cost anybody their salary and their life, right, and their livelihood. I know so many people within the skateboarding industry who built those spaces by trial and error, and they would all tell you, like, yes, it made them stronger, better people, but like it would have been great to go to school and like not waste, over time cumulatively hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, right? Mm-hmm. But we are a new, nascent industry, so everyone did do that, or most people did that. So being in school is a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to like analyze and figure out what's going right and what's going wrong, and then apply that. And I mean, that is like, everybody wishes they could do that, because we are living life. This gives you the opportunity to see it, and like, as I say, you put it on the wall and figure out what's going on. I always ask the students, like, what's the first role of the dean or the president of your school or any institution? And usually they give me a lot of different answers, but that number one answer usually comes at number 6 or 7, because they're like, oh, you got to get money to the donors, you got to build things, you got to do this, right? Because that's what life seems like. And then someone will go, oh, professor, they're supposed to take care of us. And you're like, boom, that's right. That's their job, is to take care of us. And all those other things are just like, those are the number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If they're taking care of us as students, they'll get the donors, they'll build the institutions. If they are taking care of our academic life, if they make sure I'm safe and don't have to worry about being sexually assaulted on campus, they don't have to worry that my identity or my voice is not heard. If they do that, all that other stuff is gonna come. So when you start class that way and they're like, oh, structures, someone's job is to do this, and then you do the rest of it, they start to go like, wow, this action sports, this skateboarding lens really lets us figure out any job, any position, anywhere. So again, that was a short version, which was still long, but they do look at race, class, gender, but the class is about understanding power and advocacy and what you can do when you're in those spots, I mean, that's
amazing. I mean, it's powerful stuff.
Well, I think
I try.
there's endless amounts of that we can unpack this.
Which is way too much.
I've just been shown the amount of minutes we've been talking for, and it's pretty
It's too long. It's already too long.
I know that Charles-Antoine, our founder, wanted to come up and
yes,
and just speak a little bit.
I just would like to thank you.
Oh no,
for sharing all this.
no problem.
He wants to come up and say thanks, and maybe to give the final of what's on the horizon for you.
All this knowledge, sharing all this was so inspiring.
Oh no, thank you.
For understanding it and for bringing my understanding of the skate culture at a much higher level than it used to be.
No, thank you for inviting me to be here. And I know it's very nerdy, but hopefully everybody really gets like, this is the goals, what we're trying to get done.
I have just been thinking the whole way during your talk that the guy that I should have invited here was the mayor of Brussels. We've been fighting for like 7 years to get a skate park in town. Yeah. It is even harder than in Afghanistan to get a land in order to fund a skate park. So you're the right guy to bring in front of this guy.
Oh, well, I would love to. I'd love to. And I this is what I say in class too, is just that there are no no's. Like you basically look at things as like you have your allies and your adversaries, but your adversaries are only your adversaries until you've triggered enough things for them to recognize that of course they are your allies. So to hear like, oh, we can't do this or we can't get this done, it just means that we have not spoken in the language that they need in order to say yes. Yeah. And that's and yeah, I mean it's the truth. And it could be someone higher than, if that's the mayor of Brussels, then obviously maybe we need to take this up a level, because that person always aspires to be someone else, right? So this I tell them. Again. Right. That's it.
Got to present it a different way.
That's it. Like whatever it is, like if they're thinking that skateboarding is one thing, how do we show them that it's something else? Unless they're just very mean. I was going to go on record. If they're not cool, if people are not cool and they're very mean,
then that's not skateboarding.
Right. If they're terrible people, then I also say to all my class and all the skaters, like, hey, if those people aren't cool, then that's fine. You know that, then you just go above them. Then you can go above them.
He's a cool mayor.
All right, so it's a cool mayor, so I'm excited then. I'm very excited. I was
planning to talk with you about social entrepreneurship, which is definitely the next level in where we are heading to for next year, related to the to 24 to 28, etc.
I mean, you're doing amazing work here. Just the fact that you're making it skateboarding accessible to so many different groups all over the world, and bringing in artists to work with you that might normally not connect with skateboarding culture, and you're allowing them to be able to see how their work can mean so much all over the world. Like that is another level, and it's a space that hasn't happened before in that way. So I mean, you're crafting and creating your own lane too.
Coming
so
from
it's good.
you means a lot by hearing this, definitely. And I would like to emphasize on the fact that it's true. We are bringing artists that are not specially related to that, and it's amazing to realize the happiness it brings to them. Those artists can stop collaborating with us, and they're just letting us, okay, what's next? Where do we do the next project, etc.?
You can say it's been confirmed by a doctor.
Yes, you can. Yeah, also true.
Neftalie, we've been talking. You've been talking with Oisín. Thank you very much,
yes,
Oisín
thank you.
Zelia, for this talk. It has been really inspiring for a long time. So I propose to continue this talk with a beer, with a Belgian beer, with a Belgian
yes, indeed. Yes, and we should call the mayor. Maybe the mayor wants to have it there. Yeah. That's it. We could do that.
Thirsty too.
Yes.
We do have many topics to discuss about social entrepreneurship, and I'm sure that we'll still be connected.
Yes, very much. Yes, very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. We did it.